Aloha and welcome to Botany 101. I'm Angela Nishimoto. As you may recall, in the last couple of lectures we've been doing a survey of different kind of organisms. We covered the bacteria and the archaea. We touched upon viruses. We talked a little bit about viroids and also about prions. Okay, and today we're going to continue with our survey of life forms, talking about some protista. Okay, so all living things used to live in the oceans less than 1 billion years ago. Okay, so less than 1 billion years ago, all living things lived in the oceans. In the oceans, they were protected from these various characters. They're protected from drying out. They were protected from UV radiation. They were protected from large fluctuations in temperature because remember water is something that mediates temperature. Okay, and the living things absorb the nutrients directly from water for the most part. Okay, now about 400 million years ago, okay, green algae made several transitions, okay, from water to land. Okay, so this happened many times, right? And the green algae became the green plants, right? So there's an example of green alga called Coleocada, okay, Coleocade, which is a tiny freshwater green alga. Okay, this is a picture of it. It lives as an epiphyte on submerged plants. Okay, an epiphyte is either an alga or a plant, a land plant, that attaches and grows onto another alga or plant, okay, without getting any nutrients from it. Okay, so this here looks like a little epiphyte on a tree. Okay, so algae also can be called epiphytes, the ones that live on submerged plants and other algae. Okay, another thing is this Coleocada actually shares features with higher plants. Okay, for one thing, it has cells that resemble parenchyma. Remember parenchyma from way earlier in the semester? Parenchyma, collenchyma, sclerenchyma. Okay, so they have cells that resemble parenchyma cells that you see in higher plants. Okay, also the Coleocade has a cell plate and phragmoplast forming during mitosis, as cytokinesis and telophase. Okay. Coleocada also has a covering for the zygote, so it has almost like a maternal investment. Okay. And also, it produces a lignin-like compound. It's not exactly lignin, but it's lignin-like. And this was present 100 million years earlier than plants' evolution to life on land. Okay? So the presence in algae kind of might explain how plants became adapted to land. Okay, so this lignin-like compound, like lignin, adds strength to the cell walls and protects against microbes. Okay? Now the features of the protista. Okay, remember that they're in the domain Eukarya. Remember that there are three domains. You have the domain bacteria and the domain archaea, which we covered before. Okay, the third domain is Eukarya. Okay, so all organisms in the Eukarya, the domain Eukarya, have eukaryotic cells. Okay, they include the protista, the animalia, the fungi, and the plantae. Okay, now the kingdom protista are eukaryotes that don't fit other kingdoms. Okay, they just don't. Here's a unicellular protistan. Okay, so kingdom protista is like a catch-all kingdom. Okay, they lack a set of unifying features. Okay, so it's like a catch-all kingdom. They just put organisms in the kingdom protista that don't fit anyplace else. Okay, so many of these protistans are unicellular, but not all of them. And unicellular organisms are organisms that are composed of a single cell. That makes the entire organism. Okay, Some of these are euglenoids, protozoans, and some algae. Okay. Now other algae are multicellular, colonial, or filamentous. Okay, so they're either truly multicellular, or they have single cells that live in a colony, or they're filamentous, where you have cells growing in a row. Okay. Algae also do photosynthesis. Okay. So that's their main mode of nutrient acquiring. They do photosynthesis, or they make their own food using the light from sunlight. Okay, light energy. Whereas the slime molds and protozoans, they ingest their food. Okay, so here's a slime mold. Okay, so these are animal-like protists. Okay, so the algae are plant-like protists, or animal-like protists. Okay. Now the euglenoids either photosynthesize or they ingest food. Okay. And very much like fungi, the oomycetes and the chytrids absorb their food in solution. Okay? So you can see that they have characteristics, the protistans have characteristics of the other three kingdoms, the Animalia, the fungi, and the plantae. Okay, different ones have different characteristics. Okay, reproduction is either by cell division and sexual processes. Okay. Many protists are motile, usually the single cell ones, okay, usually by flagella, all right? Others are non-motile, but they may have motile cells, such as some of the reproductive cells might be motile with flagella on them. Okay, now the algae. Okay. The algae have no true leaves or flowers, although some have flattened leaf-like blades. Okay, so they have no true leaves or flowers, and the body of the alga is called the thallus, Thallus. Okay, so they include seaweeds, pond scums, fish tank films, and the colored patches you see in swimming pools when there hasn't been enough chemicals added to the swimming pool. Okay. And the algae are grouped into phyla. Remember what a phylum is. Yeah, phylum is a level just below kingdom because we're in the kingdom Protista. And algae are grouped into phyla. A phylum is about the equivalent of a division. Remember, dear King David, dear King Philip, come out for goodness sake, right? You're going to have to know that, right? So these are grouped into phyla based on the forms of the reproductive cells and also on combinations of pigments and the food reserves that they store. Okay? So we're going to start our survey of the algae with a phylum Chlorophyta. Okay, these are the green algae, right? Usually they're green. Okay? They have a variety of forms. Okay, some are unicellular and microscopic. For example, there's an alga called Micromonas that is only 1 micrometer in diameter. Okay, it's very, very tiny. It's a millionth of a meter in diameter. This is actually the smallest eukaryotic cell known. Okay. Now, other unicellular algae are larger. Okay. We also have some that are thread-like filaments. We have some that are plate-like colonies. We have some that are net-like tubes. Okay. And we have those that are like hollow spheres. Many, there's incredible amount of variety in the green algae. Some are seaweeds, okay, and some look like lettuce leaves or long green ropes. Okay. There are some unicellular species that make greenish patches or streaks on tree bark. Okay. Some grow on sloth's fur. You know, the sloth is a very slow-moving animal. Okay. There are some green algae that also, unicellular algae that also grow on other jungle animals. They help to camouflage them. So here you have some kind of like a I guess it's called horny toad, or horned toad in the desert. So this is an animal that happens to be camouflaged against its background. So the sloth, the green growth on the sloth's fur would help to camouflage the sloth from, I guess, any predator that might want to eat it. Okay. Some live in snowbanks, in flatworms. Here's a flatworm. Okay. In sponges. Here's a sponge. On rocks. Even on the backs of turtles. Okay. They're the most common member in lichen partnerships. Remember we talked a little bit about lichens last time when we talked about the cyanobacteria, because some cyanobacteria do form partnerships with fungi to form a lichen. Okay. Now the greatest variety of the chlorophyta are found in fresh water. Okay. In ponds and lakes and streams. Okay. Now the ocean forms are varied too, the marine forms. They form an important part of the phytoplankton. And of course they're an important part of food chains. Okay. And the phylum Chlorophyta have in common that they all have chlorophylls A and B and other pigments that are similar to those of higher plants. Okay. The green algae are the ancestors of the land plants. Here's a fern, which is of course a land plant. Okay. And like land plants, they store food as starch, okay, within their chloroplasts. Okay. And except for a group of green algae called the bryopsids, most have one nucleus per cell. Okay, bryopsids are cynocytic. That means that they don't have cross walls. That means they have more than one nucleus per cell. Okay, maybe even multinucleate. Okay, and they produce asexually and sexually, so they have variety in terms of the reproductive life. Okay. Now, Chlamydomonas. Okay, this is a small, very actively moving alga, single-celled alga. Okay, it lives in quiet freshwater pools. Okay, and they have fossil relatives that have been found in rocks that are almost 1 billion years old. Here's a look at Chlamydomonas. Okay, here's a cup-shaped chloroplast. Here's the nucleus, here's a red eye spot. Here are contractovacuoles, here are the flagella that helps it move. Okay. So it's unicellular. Okay. Yes, it's unicellular and it has a multi-layered cell wall. Okay. So most of them have a red eye spot on the chloroplast. It's not really like an eye, it's just actually like a little pigmented area that helps it to discern where light is. So the Chlamydomonas can swim toward the light. And here's this cup-shaped chloroplast here. Okay. They also have pyrenoids. Pyrenoids are a proteinaceous structure that function in synthesizing starch. Okay, here's the nucleus. Here are the vacuoles, the contractovacuoles. Okay, and here are the flagella. They help it move. It helps it to swim. Okay, and here's an eye spot, usually in the chloroplast. Okay, so this red eye spot allows it to swim toward the light. Okay. And all cells in Chlamydomonas are haploid. Okay. And the flagella pulls the cell through the water where it kind of swims around very rapidly. Now these cells are pretty small. They're less than 25 micrometers large, which is still 3 times larger than a human red blood cell, but still pretty small. Okay. Now the asexual reproductive life of this plant, or this alga, sorry. Okay, so before asexual reproduction happens, the flagella fall off or are absorbed. Okay. Then the nucleus divides by mitosis. Okay. The one cell becomes two cells within the cellulose cell wall. Okay. Then the two new cells develop flagella. Then they swim away when the parent cell wall breaks down. Okay? And sometimes it does more than one mitosis. Okay? So they can produce 4 or 8 or 16 or 32 cells. Okay? And all the cells are haploid. Okay? In this asexual life cycle. Okay? Now in sexual reproduction, okay, that happens under certain conditions of light, temperature, and some other environmental forces that maybe we don't really know that much about. Okay, but what happens is that many cells in the populations congregate with each other, okay, and pairs of cells are attracted to each other, okay. They act as gametes. Sometimes they have two types. You have a plus type and a minus type, okay. The cell walls break down. Then the protoplasts mate, fusing, okay, and that forms zygotes, okay. Then a new cell wall forms around each zygote, okay. So here's a look at the life cycle and reproduction of Chlamydomonas, okay. Here's the asexual life cycle. Okay, here, so you have a deflagellation, okay. The cytoplasm divides into different cells, 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 or 16 or 32, okay. Then what you have is daughter cells released as zoospores from their parent cell wall, okay. Now the sexual life cycle, okay, so the parent cell divides mitotically into daughter cells. Okay, so you have gametes of different sexual types. You have the plus type and the minus type. Okay, and what they do is they stick to each other. Okay, then 2 are released from the cell walls and they'll fuse. Okay, and the 2 gametes will then form a zygote, which is the diploid state. Okay, that develops a thick wall and becomes a zygospore, right? Then the zygote undergoes meiosis, producing 4 zoospores, and then the cycle continues, okay? Okay, now the zygospore may remain dormant for a long time, for months, okay? The cells diploid, then do meiosis like we just showed you with that illustration. So you end up with 4 haploid spores. The zygote's wall breaks down, okay? And these 4 haploid spores are zoospores. So zoospores are motile cells that don't fuse with other cells. And the zoospores swim away, okay? And then they grow to be full-size Chlamydomonas, okay? They grow to become full-size Chlamydomonas. Okay, so that's one kind of green alga, okay? This unicellular Chlamydomonas. Okay, so here's another life cycle of Chlamydomonas. Okay, so you have here the vegetative cells, okay, producing the plus strains and the minus strains, and they make gametes. They function as gametes, okay. Then they stick to each other, and then the cells are released from their cell walls. Then they'll activate their mating structures. Then they'll fuse, and fertilization happens. Okay, so then you'll have a 4 flagellar zygote, okay, that develops into a zygospore, okay, and then the process continues, okay. So that's Chlamydomonas, unicellular green alga. Now another kind of alga is called Eulothrix. Okay, it's a thread-like alga. Okay, it grows on twigs and rocks and debris in cold freshwater areas such as ponds, lakes, and streams. And there are some that live in marine habitats. So Eulothrix, of course, is a genus name, okay, of this alga. Okay, so each individual Eulothrix is a single row of cells in a filament. Okay, it has a basal cell which is a little longer. It's called a holdfast. Okay, so holdfast attaches the filament to the substrate, whatever it's anchored to. Okay, so each cell has a chloroplast, and each chloroplast has one or more pyrenoids. Remember what pyrenoids are, right? They're proteinaceous structures that actually help to synthesize starch. Okay? So any cell can divide except the holdfast cell, and so the filament can get longer. Okay? That's its vegetative growth. Now asexual reproduction has to do with the contents of cell, clump and condense. Then they do mitosis to form zoospores. Okay, these zoospores have 4 flagella, okay, as opposed to Chlamydomonas. Chlamydomonas zoospores have 2 flagella, okay. The zoospores leave the parent cell through a hole. They swim and settle on a submerged object, okay. Then they shed flagella and the cells divide. And one cell becomes a holdfast, and the other cell divides and becomes a new filament. Okay, so here's a look. Okay, this is part of the sexual cycle. Okay, so here you have the spores released. Okay, the individual spores coming together, fusing, forming a zygote. Okay. Now sexual reproduction. Okay, similar to asexual reproduction at the beginning anyway, that the contents of the cell condense and divides, okay? And there are up to 64 cells produced, and these have 2 flagella, and they function as gametes, okay? They unite in pairs and form zygotes. Okay, and they form thick walls, okay, and then they can go dormant from there, right? So here, showing the asexual reproductive cycle, okay, here you have a single filament of an individual Eulothrix, okay, so the zoospore escapes from the parent cell. The zoospore settles and develops into a new filament. That's asexual reproduction. In sexual reproduction, you have a cell, okay, where gametes are formed. They escape from their parent cells. Okay, the 2 different gametes will then unite and form a zygote. So also in this Eulothrix life cycle, the zygote is the only diploid state. Okay, the zygote goes dormant, and then when it's ready and conditions are right for it to do what it does, it undergoes meiosis. Okay, the zoospores escape, then they settle, and then they grow a new filament, and then they can continue with their sexual reproductive cycle. Okay. So the zygote does meiosis to form zoospores, and the gametes come from different filaments, okay, and they look the same. When the 2 gametes look the same as each other, that type of mating is called isogamy, Okay, iso means the same, and gamy, like monogamy, which is when you and one person are monogamous, right? When you folks are just with each other, right? So isogamy means you have two gametes looking the same as each other. Okay, isogamy. Okay. So the zygotes are the only diploid cells. Okay, and this kind of isogamy is found only in simpler organisms. Okay, so zygotes are the only diploid cells, and all the other cells are haploid. Okay, here's another look at the sexual life cycle. Okay, so here's one producing a gamete, here's another one producing a gamete, another individual producing a gamete. Okay, they fuse and form a zygote. Okay, which then undergoes meiosis to release zoospores, which grows into a new filaments of Eulothrix. Okay. Now the next green alga we're going to talk about is Spirogyra. Okay. Spirogyra is also known as water silk. Okay. It has watery, they have watery sheaths. They sort of feel slimy. Okay. It's a common freshwater alga with unbranched filaments. Okay. They tend to float at the surface of quiet waters. Okay. So each cell has at least one or more long, frilly, ribbon-shaped chloroplasts. So chloroplasts can be different shapes. You saw the cup-shaped chloroplast in Chlamydomonas, and now you'll have a ribbon-shaped chloroplast in Spirogyra. Okay, so this chloroplast is spirally wrapped around the vacuole of the cell. Okay, so most species of Spirogyra have about 1 to 2 chloroplasts per cell. Okay, and they have pyrenoids at regular intervals along the chloroplast. Okay, so here's a look at a cell of Spirogyra. Okay, you can see the ribbon-shaped chloroplast kind of wrapped spirally. And here are the pyrenoids, these kind of roundish shapes here. Okay, used to synthesize starch. Okay. So asexual reproduction in Spirogyra, okay, actually they do not produce zoospores or other cells with flagella, but they have only fragmentation of filaments. That means the filaments kind of are broken up and form new algae from them. Sort of like some plants, you know, if you cut them up and throw them away, they'll actually regenerate and grow new plants. You end up with more plants than you started with. You know, if you have a compost heap and they start growing in there, you know. Okay, so often this happens during storms or disturbance of some kind when the filaments fragment. Okay. Now, sexual reproduction is through a process known as conjugation. Okay, first of all, the filaments tend to be kind of hair-like, and filaments have a tendency to touch each other. So sometimes when the filaments touch, the cells will form these papillae opposite each other. Okay, these are just little like little bulges from the cell. Okay, like this. And you have two filaments of Spirogyra. They can actually form these papillae, and they'll touch each other. Okay, and the papillae will fuse, forming conjugation tubes. Okay, and then the condensed protoplasts of the cells act as gametes. Okay, so those of one filament will flow through the conjugation tubes to the adjacent cells. Okay, and the cell contents will fuse to form a zygote. Okay, so here you have the conjugation tubes forming, the papillae forming conjugation tubes. Okay, so the one that actually sends its protoplast into the other cell is generally the one that's thought to be the male cell, or what we designate as a male cell, And the one that receives the protoplasm from the other cell is called the female cell. Okay? The ones, they come together, the nuclei fuse, and then they become diploid. Okay? So that's called conjugation. So then you have thick cell walls developing, and the zygote goes dormant. Okay? The zygote can be dormant for a long time. Okay? Then the cell contents do meiosis. Okay? And you end up with 4 haploid cells. 3 of them disintegrate and 1 grows into a new filament. Okay, so here's Spirogera, very beautiful. Okay. Now we'll go through the life cycle of another green alga called Edogonium. Okay. Edogonium is an epiphyte. Remember what an epiphyte is? It's a plant or an alga that grows on another plant or alga that doesn't derive any nutrient from it. Okay, it's an epiphyte on aquatic angiosperms. Angiosperms are flowering plants and algae. Okay, this looks like an oogonium, the structure that bears the eggs. Okay, so it has a basal cell that serves as a holdfast. Okay, and the terminal cell at the tip is rounded. Okay, all the other cells are cylindrical. Okay, and they make a filament. And each of these cells has a chloroplast. Okay. And the chloroplast is net-like. Now, asexual reproduction. Okay, either through zoospores or fragmentation. Okay. The zoospores are produced one by one at the tips of the filaments. Each has, this is kind of funny, each has about 120 small flagella. It's like a fringe. I wish I had a picture. It's like a tiny, balding, faceless head. Okay? You can see it in your text. Okay? They settle and form new filaments. Okay, each of these zoospores. Okay? Now, sexual reproduction, okay? You have more sexual specialization than what we've seen so far, right? Because we've only seen isogamy, right? So you have small, short, box-like cells that are called antheridia, okay? And pair of sperms are produced, okay? They look like the zoospores, you know, with the little fringe, like a faceless, balding head, okay? They look like the zoospores, but they're smaller, the sperms. Okay. Then some cells get swollen and rounded, and these are the oogonia. Oo means egg. Okay. So it contains eggs, and it matures, and a pore opens in the oogonium. Okay. The sperms are attracted to the oogonium. The oogonium secretes a chemical substance. Do you remember what that's called? From a long time ago when we were talking about tropisms and taxis, remember? This is called chemotaxis, right? Where you have a chemical attracting or causing movement of an entire organism or of a gamete from one place to another. Chemotaxis, okay? So then one sperm enters the oogonium and fuses with the egg, forms a zygote. Okay. The zygote wall thickens and a reddish oil accumulates. Now in Edogonium, in some species, the oogonium are on female filaments only. The antheridia, or the male structures, are on male filaments only. Okay. So the zygotes can be dormant for more than 1 year, right? Then they undergo meiosis to form 4 zoospores. Each becomes a new filament. Okay, so this is a case where sexual reproduction happens when one gamete is motile. Remember that little fringe of a little balding faceless head, right? Other gamete is larger and stationary. That's a way of mating called oogamy. Okay, so we looked at isogamy. We have two gametes looking the same as each other, and that's called isogamy. Okay, and then now you have oogamy, where you have a difference between one gamete and another. One gamete is motile, the other is larger and stationary. Okay? Now other green algae, okay, they're very diverse. There's a large variety of forms and chloroplast shapes. Okay? Most do both asexual and sexual reproduction. Okay? So as an example, chlorella, there's a picture of chlorella. You might have heard of chlorella. Chlorella is very big in health food stores. It's very expensive. It's supposed to be very nutritious for you though. It has a lot of vitamins and minerals. Okay, chlorella. Okay, so they usually reproduce from daughter cells or autospores through mitosis. Okay. This alga is very easy to culture, and it's a favorite organism of researchers. Okay, it's used during investigations of photosynthesis and respiration in plants and algae. Okay. Another interesting thing about this alga is that maybe it could play a role in space exploration. Okay. Now spaceships, space exploration tends to be limited by the weight of oxygen tanks and also food that's needed by the astronauts. Okay. But chlorella and other algae are oxygen gas generators, right? Oxygen gas is a byproduct of photosynthesis. So they generate oxygen gas, and they also make food. Okay? So a spacecraft could have tanks of algae, and they do photosynthesis using the carbon dioxide that's exhaled by the astronauts. Okay? The algae multiply, they can be eaten, or they could be fed to shrimp, and the shrimp could be eaten. Okay, as a protein source. I think chlorella is supposed to have proteins in it too. Okay? Now, other algae and bacteria could recycle the wastes that are in the system. Okay? So it's a closed system like this has been successful with mice. Okay? Now, do you remember another closed system with a mouse that we talked about before? Remember Joseph Priestley in the 1600s, right, or 1700s, right? He used a sprig of mint to keep a mouse alive in a closed jar, right? The sprig of mint was doing photosynthesis, regenerating the oxygen gas that kept the mouse alive through respiration, so the mouse could breathe. That's another example of a closed system. Okay. Now we also have desmids, which are very different. Look how beautiful they are. Okay. There are about 2,500 species, and they tend to be crescent-shaped or elliptical or star-shaped cells. Okay. And they tend to be free-floating in the plankton. Okay. They reproduce by conjugation. They're usually unicellular, and they reproduce by conjugation. Okay. Isn't that beautiful, the desmids? Green algae. And we have another alga called hydrodictyon. Okay. They're also known as the water nets. They have net-like tubular colonies. Okay. And in them, sexual reproduction is isogamous. Okay. The gametes become zygotes, and the zygotes give rise to zoospores. Okay, another green alga is called acetabularia. It's also known as a mermaid's wineglass. Okay. It's a single huge cell shaped like a mushroom. Okay. You can see the so-called caps of the mushroom-shaped mermaid's wineglass here. Okay. The cell can be up to 2 inches long. Okay. So researchers have done some very basic research, okay, using this alga. Okay. What they've done is they've actually gotten an alga, removed its cap, put a new nucleus inside of it. And then what happens is that when the base grows a new cap, the new cap is the same as the old cap. Okay, it's very identical, virtually identical to the first cap that they removed. They remove the second cap, and another cap will form, but this cap will be intermediate between the first species and the second species, because the nucleus that they implanted is actually of a different species of acetabularia. Okay, so this, let's see, this third cap, they remove that cap, you know, the one that's intermediate between the two, and then another cap will grow, and this cap will be just like the one that the nucleus came from. Okay, this shows actually how the nucleus sort of presents or produces chemicals or some kind of factors that actually are in the cytoplasm of the cell that kind of governs the shape or morphology of the cap. Okay, so that shows you that even if the nucleus isn't present, it still exerts an effect at least sometime after the cap is gone. Okay? Okay, now we also have volvox, okay, which is a colonial alga. Here's a very nice image. Okay, they're like these single cells. They're similar to Chlamydomonas, but they're like single cells held in a gelatinous substance. Okay, so all these little dots in here are like individual cells. Sometimes their flagella kind of touch each other, and the flagella move, kind of keep making this kind of hundreds of thousands of cells in this thing that looks like a hollow ball spinning. Okay, so the flagella are beating and the ball is kind of spinning in the water. Okay, so this is an example of a colonial alga, right? Another green alga is ulva, okay, also known as sea lettuce. Many of you have seen these at the beaches or, you know, at places where there are rocks and coral substrate. Okay, it's a multicellular seaweed with blades that can be up to 3 feet long. Okay, and the blades can be either haploid or diploid. They have a kind of interesting life cycle. Okay, so the blades are haploid or diploid. Okay, and except for the reproductive structures that are produced, the blades are isomorphic, or both the haploid blades and the diploid blades look the same. You can't tell the difference just by looking at them. Okay, you either have to follow their life cycle or you have to count their chromosomes. Okay, we'll see ova again. Okay, now Cladophora, okay, is this branched and filamentous alga. Okay, it's a species that lives in fresh water or different species that live in freshwater and marine habitats. Okay, so this is an example of a plant that is multinucleate or cenocytic. That means that in some cases of some of these siphonous green algae, that the whole plant is like one giant cell because they don't have cross walls, so they have many nuclei inside of them. Okay? Okay, now we move on to another phylum. Okay, that was a long one on the Chlorophyta. So we move to the phylum Chromophyta. Okay, they include the yellow-green algae or the Xanthophyceae. When something ends in CE, that means a family. Okay, phyta means division or phylum. Okay, golden brown algae or the Chrysophyceae. The diatoms or the Bacillariophyceae. And the brown algae, or the Phaeophyceae. Okay? So about 3/4 of 7,600 species in this group, the Chromophyta, are microscopic, but the kelps and other brown algae are actually the best known, more well known. Okay? But they share certain features in terms of their food reserves and their specialized pigments. Okay? So they actually think that they are related to each other, these groups, no matter how different looking they are from each other. Okay? First, the diatoms. Okay? The diatoms are unicellular algae. They form a good part of the phytoplankton. The colder the water, the greater number of diatoms are present. Okay? So they have huge populations on and in ice in Antarctica and the Arctic. Okay. A large part of the foam at the waveline on the beaches are oils from diatoms, because oil is the main storage product of diatoms. Okay. They also dominate on damp cliffs, tree bark, bare soil, sides of buildings. Okay. They're like tiny glass boxes with lids. Okay. So half of the cell wall fits inside the other half. It's like a box inside another box. Okay. So many marine diatoms are circular if you look at them from the top. And many freshwater species kind of resemble a kayak. Okay. So up to 90%, up to 95% of the cell wall is silica, that's glass. Okay, deposited in pectin and other substances. Okay, and the diatom cell walls have fine grooves and pores that connect the protoplasm with the environment. Okay, many have more than one chloroplast per cell. Okay, and the pigments present include chlorophyll A, chlorophyll C, chlorophyll C2, and the chloroplasts tend to be golden brown, like you see in this diatom, due to the presence of another pigment called fucoxanthin. Remember, the xanthophylls are brownish pigments. So the food reserves of diatoms are oils, fats, or another carbohydrate called laminarin. Okay, and reproduction is unique. I guess that's laminarin. Okay. So half the cells become smaller through the generations until the cell does meiosis. Okay, that produces gametes that fuse and form a zygote. And then the original size of the diatom is then restored. Okay. Now the brown algae, or the Phaeophyceae. Okay. Before, the brown algae were in their own phylum, the Phaeophyta, but analyses show that they have close resemblance to other chromophytes. Okay. So they're brown to olive green in color. Okay. They were in their own phylum before. Okay. Many are large. There are none that are unicellular or colonial. There are a few that live in fresh water, but most of them live in colder ocean waters. Okay, so Macrocystis perifera is a giant kelp. Okay, it can grow 100 or more feet deep in deep water. They measured one at 900 feet long. It might have been the longest organism ever measured. Okay. So they have a thallus, which is a multicellular body, which is usually flattened. Okay. And it's not organized into leaves, stems, and roots, even though that they actually have holdfast, stipe, and blades. And holdfast is like a tough structure that looks like intertwined roots, resembles like a mass of roots. Okay. It helps to hold the seaweed to the rocks even under very harsh conditions, so it can't be ripped out very easily. Okay. The stipe is oftentimes hollow with a meristem at the base or at the blade junctions. Okay, it's almost like a stem. And the blades, of course, are almost like leaves, of course, but they're not. They're not like root, stem, and leaf, but they're analogous to them. Okay. Now the oldest parts of the blades are at the tips. Okay. So blades in most of the body do photosynthesis. Okay. And many have these gas-filled bladders. There's some that have 10% carbon monoxide gas in the bladders. I guess the gas-filled bladders help to keep them buoyant and help to hold them up close to the light. Okay. The colors of brown algae range from light yellow-brown to almost black. Okay. You have fucoxanthin, chlorophyll A, and chlorophyll C in these algae. Okay. So here's a look at a holdfast, very root-like. Here's the stipe. This is part of the stipe too. Here's gas bladders, and here's a blade. So you see it's very plant-like, even though it's not really a plant. Depends on your definition. Okay. Now the main food reserve in the brown algae is laminarin, which is a carbohydrate. Okay. Algin or alginic acid on or in the cell walls can be 40% of the dry weight of kelps. Okay. And the reproductive cells have two flagella on one side, and these are the only motile cells. Okay. Now off British Columbia and Washington State, you have these herring. And what they do is they deposit eggs up to an inch thick on giant kelp blades in the springtime. Okay. So traditionally, Native Americans harvested and sun-dried and ate them for winter or feast food. Doesn't that sound good? Yeah, seaweed and fish eggs. Look at that. Anybody who likes fish eggs like caviar or salmon roe or, sea urchin eggs, whatever, we really like that. Now sargassum, okay, gives its name to the Sargasso Sea, okay. It's a brown alga. And Sargassum echinocarpon is a species native to Hawaii. So it was used by Hawaiians, chopped up as a poultice for coral cuts. It's also known as limukala, used for a ceremonial known as ho'oponopono. Okay. Ho'oponopono happens when a family, say, or a group of people are in conflict with each other. There's sort of like strife in the family or an argument going on in the family, and people are hurt, people are angry, So what maybe the head of the family will do, or some people who are trying to intervene, everybody will sit down and talk about their feelings, talk about how they feel about the situation, talk about their side of the situation, try to see each other's point of view, because nobody likes fighting in a family, So then oftentimes in traditional ho'oponopono, when people have forgiven each other, kala means to forgive, yeah? So limukala is Sargassum echinocarpon. Anyway, so what they do is they after they forgave each other and made peace in the family, they'd take a little piece of this alga and eat it, as like a pani or a closing ceremony for what happened before, okay? So they produce asexually by fragmentation. We talked about fragmentation before. Okay. And some produce autospores, right? And for the sargassums, the conspicuous plants are usually diploid, okay, for these algae. Okay. Now another genus called Fucus, okay, have separate male and female thalli, okay. Or they'll have both sexes on one thallus, okay. So here's a little bit of their life history here for Fucus. The receptacles develop at the tip of the thallus, and pores open into these structures called conceptacles, okay. Within the conceptacles, gametangia are formed. 8 eggs are produced in an oogonium. It undergoes meiosis and mitosis, okay. And 64 sperms are produced in an antheridium. It undergoes meiosis and undergoes 4 mitoses, okay. Eggs and sperms are released. And then fertilization happens, which leads to the formation of a zygote, which leads to the formation of a thallus. Okay? Okay, so that's all we have for you today. We covered some green algae and some brown algae and some diatoms, some of the chlorophyta and the chromophyta. Okay, so we'll continue with the algae next time. All right? Aloha.